fourth or fifth paragraph.
1 minute. 1 minute. Let me just look. Can you, the problem is that I don't have the screen. If you show me the, I don't know how to put it. Like,
okay, yeah, sure.
Where is the beginning of the chapter?
I remember we read 4 or 5 paragraphs. And there was a lot of discussion that day then.
Okay, come down. Yeah, come down. Okay, then.
This we read.
I think you can start from here.
The living entities are not as great as Narayan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless somebody remembers exactly where we stopped. Does anyone remember exactly where we stopped? No, it doesn't look like anyone remembers exactly where we stopped. It's okay. If you read once more, no problem. It's transcendental subject matter. It's as fresh, transcendentally fresh as ever. Okay.
The living entities are not as great as Narayan, Vishnu, who is beyond this material creation. Even Shankaracharya accepts Narayan to be beyond the material creation. Since neither Vishnu nor the living entity are of material creation, someone may inquire, why were the small particles of spirit created at all? The answer is that the Supreme Absolute Truth is complete in his perfection when he is both infinite and infinitesimal. If he were simply infinite but not infinitesimal, he would not be perfect. The infinite portion is the Vishnu Tattva or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the infinitesimal portion is the living entity.
Okay, what is basically explained there is the Supreme Lord for completeness is bigger than the biggest, smaller than the smallest. So that way, that is the meaning of saying that in the sense of complete. So then we could ask, are we the Supreme Lord? Because that dilemma can come, right? So are we saying that we are the same as the Supreme Lord? No. That's why I said that this topic is inconceivable. I explained this several times in the past, that no, this does not mean that does not mean at all that the Supreme Lord is we are equal to the Supreme Lord. It is how do you say, we are the energy of the Lord. He is the energetic, but energy and energetic are inseparable. So I hope you got the point that what Prabhupada is trying to make here, or Lord Chaitanya himself, original Lord Chaitanya, but Prabhupada has phrased it like this here. Very nicely has phrased it. So God would not be complete unless he's both infinite and infinitesimal. Okay, please go ahead.
Probably, can we relate this with the one of the examples that Prabhupada gives, that I just remember very, faintly, that once somebody asked that, can this happen that Krishna cannot lift anything? Can this happen like that? Then Prabhupada said, well, yes, of course. This means inconceivable. It may happen that Krishna can't live like in contact with Govardhan Parvat or like that. Something was asked. I don't remember.
I'll tell you what the incident was. Incident was that someone in the audience said, if Krishna is God, can he create something which he cannot lift? Which is so heavy that he cannot lift. Prabhupada said, yes, he can do that. But after some time, he will lift it.
Yeah, yes. Due to infinite desires of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the spiritual world exists. And due to the infinitesimal desires of the living entity, the material world exists. When the infinitesimal living entities are engaged in trying to fulfill their infinitesimal desires for material enjoyment, they are called Jiva Shakti. But when they are dovetailed with the infinite, they are called liberated souls. There is no need to ask, therefore, why God created the infinitesimal portions. They are simply the complementary side of the Supreme. It is doubtlessly essential for the infinite to have infinitesimal portions, which are inseparable parts and parcels of the Supreme Soul, because the living entities are infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme. There is a reciprocation of feelings between the infinite and the infinitesimal. Had there been no infinitesimal living entities, the Supreme Lord would have been inactive, and there would not be variegatedness in the spiritual life. There would be no meaning to a king if there were no subjects, and there would be no meaning to the Supreme Lord if there were no infinitesimal living entities. How can there be meaning to the word Lord if there is no one to rule? The conclusion is that the living entities are expansions of the energy of the Supreme Lord, and that the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the energetic. In all the Vedic literatures, including the Bhagavad Gita and Vishnu Puran, much evidence is given to distinguish between the energy and the energetic. In the Bhagavad Gita 7.4, it is clearly stated that earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the five gross elements of the material world, and mind, intelligence, and false ego, the three subtle elements, are the Lord's energies. All the material nature is divided into these 8 elements, which together comprise his inferior nature or energy. Another name for this inferior nature is Maya or illusion. Beyond these 8 inferior elements is a superior energy, which is called Para Prakriti. This Para Prakriti comprises the living entities who are found in great numbers throughout the material world. The purport is that the Supreme Lord is absolute truth, the energetic, and that as such he has energies. When one of his energies is not properly manifested, or when it is covered by some shadow, it is called Maya Shakti. The material cosmic manifestation is the product of that Maya Shakti. So, Prabhuji, I have a question here. Can I ask now?
Yeah, yes, okay, please ask.
Prabhuji, here it is written, when one of his energies is not properly manifested, and I want to understand this, or when it is covered by some shadow, that is okay, it is Maya Shakti. So here it is written the material cosmic manifestation, that means the complete material world is the product of that Maya Shakti.
Yeah.
So when it is written that it is not properly manifested, how to understand this? Because each and every energies are equally potent, or in what sense it is written?
Can you please, go just scroll down a little bit? So it means like, So here, the para prakriti consists of the living entities are found in great numbers throughout the material world. The purport is the Supreme Lord is absolute, energetic, and as such he has energies. Okay, when one of his energies is not properly manifested, or when it is covered by some shadow, it is called Maya Shakti. The example is given of the sky, and the sky being covered by the cloud. That cloud is called Maya. Here it says shadow. The same thing. It's covered by some cloud, like a spiritual sky. One part of the spiritual sky, there is a cloud. That is called Maya Shakti. That's what it means. You understood? No.
So, when it is when one of his energies is not properly manifested, or when it is covered, it means that you give the example of cloud in the sky. So, how is it said it is not properly manifested? Because
Properly manifested means this is not the reality. Okay, let's put it like this. See, the material, as it's explained previously, the material energy is created just for the enjoyment of the living entity. You know that, right? Okay. Now, both shadow and reflection have the same similar characteristic. For example, in a reflection, a three-dimensional object have appear two-dimensional, correct? There is no three-dimensional reflection. It's only two-dimensional reflection. A three-dimensional object is reflected when reflected in water appears two-dimensional. Okay. Similarly, when what do you call it? Okay, take for example a shadow. In a shadow, you cannot see everything that is there in a real object. Okay, so like that. So that is the meaning of saying not properly manifested means incomplete. I mean, that is the meaning of not properly manifested. It's like a shadow or a reflection. That is the meaning.
Okay.
You understood?
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, so it has to be always, for example, when we are talking, it has to be always in reference to something. Okay, in reference to an image, in reference to an object, its reflection or its shadow is not properly manifested. No, there may be resemblance, but it's not properly manifest. For example, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says the material world is like inverted banyan tree. So in a reflection, sometimes there's inversion. No, there is, so like material world is like an inverted. So it is improperly manifested. You understood? So that is the meaning.
Perverted.
Yeah, I mean you could say inverted or perverted, or
inverted also
it's not incomplete also. It is incomplete also. Therefore, the living entities cannot find completeness here. You understood, right? The living entities can only find completeness in the spiritual realm. This material realm by itself is complete. I'm not saying no. But Prabhupada says the material realm by itself is complete. But it's improperly manifested. It is complete by itself means it doesn't require some external agent to sustain itself. It is self-sustaining. Krishna has created it as self-sustaining. As Prabhupada says, what is it? In Vishopanishad mantra, when it says it's complete, Purnam, it means it does not need an external source to keep providing something to it. It's self-sustaining. By the will of, this is one of the potential of the Lord, but it is improperly manifested energy of the Lord. Like, for example, in the spiritual world, you have Sat and Chit and Ananda features. But here in this material world, you have Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. That is the nature of this material world. So it's improperly manifested. That's the meaning.
Yes, sir.
Is it okay?
Thank you.
You understand?
Yeah. The living entities are factually beyond this covered inferior energy. They have their pure spiritual existence, their pure identity, and their pure mental activities, all beyond the manifestation of this material cosmos. The same thing is mentioned here. Although the living entity's mind, intelligence, and identity are beyond the range of this material world, when he enters into this material world, due to his desire to lord it over matter, his original mind, intelligence, and body become covered by the material energy. When he is again free of the covering of this material inferior energy, he is called liberated. When he is liberated, he has no false ego, but his real ego again comes into existence. Foolish mental speculators think that after liberation, one's identity is lost, but that is not so. Because of the living entity is eternally part and parcel of God, when he is liberated, he revives his original, eternal, part and parcel identity. The realization of the Aham Brahmasmi, I'm spirit, not this body, does not mean that the living entity loses his identity. At the present moment, a person may consider himself to be matter, but in his liberated state, he will understand that he is not matter, but spirit soul, part of the infinite. To become Krishna conscious or spiritually conscious or and to engage in the transcendental loving service of Krishna are the signs of the liberated state. In the Vishnu Puran 6.7.61, it is clearly stated, Vishnu Shakti Paraprokta Kshetra Jnanakya Tatha Para Avidya Karma Sangyayam Tritiya Shakti Ishyate. The energy of the Supreme Lord is divided into three, Para, Kshetrajna and Avidya. The Para energy is actually the energy of the Supreme Lord Himself. The Kshetrajna energy is the living entity, and the Avidya energy is the material world or Maya. It is called Avidya or ignorance because under the spell of this material energy, one forgets his actual position and his relationship with the Supreme Lord. The conclusion is that the living entities represent one of the energies of the Supreme Lord. As infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme, they are called jivas. If the jivas are artificially placed on the same level with the infinite Supreme, because both of them are Brahman or Spirit, then bewilderment will certainly be the result. Generally, Mayavadi philosophers are perplexed before a learned Vaishnava because the Mayavadis cannot explain the cause of bondage of the living entities. They simply say it is due to ignorance, but they cannot explain how the living entities can be covered by ignorance if they are the supreme. The actual reason is that the living entities, although qualitatively one with the supreme, are infinitesimal, not infinite. Had they been infinite, there would have been no possibility of their being covered by ignorance. Because the living entity is infinitesimal, he can be covered by an inferior energy. The foolishness and ignorance of the Mayavadis are revealed when they try to explain how the infinite can be covered by ignorance. It is offensive to attempt to qualify the infinite by arguing that he is subject to the spell of ignorance. Although Shankara attempted to cover the Supreme Lord by his Mayavad philosophy, he was simply following the order of the Supreme Lord. It should be understood that his teachings were a timely necessity, but not a permanent fact. In the Vedanta Sutra, the distinction between the energy and the energetic is accepted from the very beginning. The second aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadi Asya Yataha, clearly states that the Supreme Lord is the source of all the emanations. Thus, the emanations are the energy of the Supreme, whereas the Supreme himself is the energetic. Shankara has falsely argued that if the transformation of energy is accepted, the Supreme Absolute Truth cannot remain immutable. But this is not true. Despite the fact that unlimited energies are always being generated, the Supreme Absolute Truth remains always the same. He is not affected by the emanations of unlimited energies. Shankaracharya has therefore incorrectly established his theory of illusion. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can I stop? Navneet Mataji, would you share?
Yes, Mataji, I'm ready.
Thank you, Mataji. Sorry, Prabhuji, I have to go somewhere.
Yeah, no worries.
Should I read, Prabhuji?
Yes, we are waiting for you.
Ramanujacharya, is my voice clear, audible?
Yes.
Ramanujacharya has discussed this point very nicely. One may argue, since there was only one absolute truth after the creation of this material world, how it is possible that the living entities emanated from him? If he were alone, how could he have produced or generated the infinitesimal living entities? In answer to this question, the Vedas state that everything is generated from the absolute truth, everything is maintained by the absolute truth, and after annihilation, everything enters into the absolute truth. This statement from the Upanishads makes it clear that when the living entities are liberated, they enter into the supreme existence without changing their original constitutional position. We must always remember that the Supreme Lord has his creative function and that the infinitesimal living entities have their creative functions too. It is not that their creative function is lost when they are liberated and enter into the Supreme after the dissolution of the material body. On the contrary, the creative function of the living entity is properly manifested in the liberated state. If the living entity's activities are manifest even when he is materially conditioned, then how is it possible for his activities to stop when he attains liberation? The living entities entering the state of liberation may be compared to a bird entering a tree, or an animal entering the forest, or a plane entering the sky. In no case are activities stopped. When explaining the second aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, Shankara has most unceremoniously tried to explain that Brahman, or the Supreme Absolute Truth, is impersonal. He has also cunningly tried to switch the doctrine of byproducts into the doctrine of change. For the Supreme Absolute Truth, there is no change. It is simply that a byproduct results from his inconceivable powers of action. In other words, a relative truth, a byproduct, is produced out of the supreme truth. For example, when a chair is produced out of crude wood, it is said that a byproduct is produced. The supreme absolute truth, Brahman, is immutable. And when we find a byproduct, the living entity, or this cosmic manifestation, it is a transformation of the Supreme's energies, or a byproduct of the Supreme. It is like milk being transformed into yogurt. In this way, if we study the living entities in the cosmic manifestation, it will appear that they are not different from the original absolute truth, but from the Vedic literature, understand that the absolute truth has varieties of energy, and that the living entities and the cosmic manifestation are but a demonstration of his energies. The energies are not separate from the energetic. Therefore, the living entity and cosmic manifestation are inseparable truths, part of the absolute truth. Such a conclusion regarding the absolute truth and the relative truth should be acceptable to any sane man.
Okay. Now this needs some this thing. For example, sometimes in our common everyday language, we use phrases like absolute truth. So we use that word absolute truth in common day language to mean something which is definitely true. Absolutely true, you say, right? Absolute truth. So that's how we use it in common language. But in philosophical language, or specifically here in the Bhagavatam, the word what's it? the phrase absolute truth refers to the expression Param Satyam from the first verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Param Satyam. Satyam Param Dhimahi. So it's from there it is derived. So absolute truth in a philosophical sense means, not in everyday language how we use it, in a philosophical sense, it means that truth which is not dependent on any other truth. So, and Bhagavatam establishes that truth is a person. Actually. So Krishna is not dependent on anything or anyone. When Krishna, because Krishna is not dependent on anything or anyone, he is called absolute truth, Param Satyam. But the living entities are dependent. Material nature is dependent. So they are all called relative truths. When you depend on somebody or something, it is called relative. That's the word relative means in relation to something else. A truth which is dependent on another truth is called a relative truth. So we, the living entity, is dependent on the Supreme Lord. So therefore, we are called relative truth. Absolute truth means that which is not dependent. I mean, the truth which is not dependent on anyone or anything. So that is Krishna. That is the meaning here, actually. So absolute truth is Krishna. Relative truths are the living entities. It could refer to my Prakriti, which is material nature. So anything which is dependent is called a relative truth. That is the meaning here. And one more thing that Prabhupada brings up here is that, see, I mean, even in our thing, we say that the Supreme Lord is not changeable. If he's changeable, then how can he be the Supreme Absolute Truth? So what is being explained here is that this is not a change, it's a byproduct. Like, for example, Prabhupada gives example, if a father has many children, it is not that because he's having some children, he's diminishing. It's not like that. So it's not that because the Supreme Lord is producing, or so many jivas have emanated, Janmadi Asya Yataha. He is the cause of all causes. So because so many living entities he has caused so many living entities, it does not mean that he has diminished. So he has not changed. He is exactly the same. His energy has also not diminished. He is energetic, which means he also has energy. Because so many innumerable living entities have been caused by him, that does not mean that he has changed in any manner. He remains the perfect absolute truth. That's it. Which perfect means in the sense that he remains unchanged. He is not changed in any manner whatsoever. But so therefore he's saying actually it is byproduct. It is not change. So which has been due to word jugglery, Shankara tries to establish no. This is a change. So absolute truth. So Krishna cannot be the absolute truth. So that's the argument that is being referred to here. And can you just go to the previous paragraph? Previous paragraph. Okay, here. Yeah. So what is happening here is that how do you say? We are identical with the Lord in terms of qualities, right? So we must remember that the Supreme Lord has his creative function. Infinite divinities have their creative functions also. It is not that their creative function is lost when they are liberated and enter into the Supreme after the dissolution of the material body. On the contrary, the creative function of the living entity is properly manifested in the liberated state. Okay, so if the living entity's activities are manifest even when he's materially conditioned, then how is it possible for his activity to stop when he attains liberation? So even such a big covering is not able to restrict our activity. So therefore, that's the point that Prabhupada is trying to make. So how do you expect when you're free, you will not act? We'll act more. That's the idea. Living entities entering the state of liberation may be compared to a bird entering a tree, or an animal entering the forest, or a plane, uh, what is it, entering into the sky. In no case are the activities stopped. When the plane enters into the sky, it looks like it has disappeared into the sky. No, but there is a distinct identity of this plane in the sky. That is what is being explained. So, liberation means activity where the activity of the soul can be fully manifested. That's what it means. Whereas in the material body, activity cannot be fully manifest. How can you manifest with your with this? Like, for example, uh, suppose you have a sprinter. Now Olympics games are going on, right? Suppose you have a sprinter. For him to sprint, he cannot wear what do you call it? 1-ton suit, 1,000 kilogram suit, and expect to sprint. It's not possible. But he may still be able to do something with that. So Prabhupada is trying to say that even with this material body, if you're able to function, how much more can you function without that material body? That material body is like that 1-ton piece of iron cloth. It's like an iron cloth that we are wearing. So we are not able to perform our function in our normal way. Okay. So one thing that we need to do, for example, when people ask us, this is very, very important to know. When people ask us, what is your concept of God? There are many different explanations that can be given, right? We can say one definition of God is that he is all attractive, and we know what makes him attractive: the 6 qualities, and so the 6 qualities are all found simultaneously in Krishna, and they're all found unlimitedly. This is not found in anyone else. That is why he is unique among all the sets of conscious living beings. That makes him God. That's one definition of God which we have. Krishna, the all attractive, and how that attractiveness is defined is also, and that attractiveness is also very clearly defined. Then you have this concept of God, where in other traditions also there is something called the concept of God as the creator. See, this God, you know how the word God comes? It comes from G for generator, O for operator, D for destroyer. Generator, operator, destroyer. The abbreviation of it is called God. That's how the word God has come about. Generator, operator, destroyer. So so he's so we think, okay, he's the creator, he's the operator, he's the destroyer. But our definition, we should know what our Gaudiya Vaishnava definition is, which is the definition of the Bhagavatam. It's not that he's just a creator. He is also the cause of all causes. So, which means that if we have strength, it is because that strength has been caused by Krishna. If we exist, we do exist. What I meant to say is just for the sake of explanation. We exist because we have been caused by Krishna. So, which means everything that you see, any object, anything that you see, any action that you see, any object, any action, everything, the sum total of all affairs, material and spiritual, are all caused by the Supreme Lord. The Janmadya Asya Yataha, he who is the cause of all causes. That is our definition of God. I mean, other definition also, see, definition means something which is unique to God. So Krishna is all attractive, that's unique to God. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita, you have another definition. Muktaram Yajnatapasam Sarvalokamaheshwaram Surdam Sarvabhutanam. These 3 things. These are unique to Krishna. So like that, God has many unique many things which are unique about him, due to which there are many definitions of God. There are many things which are unique about him, and therefore there are many definitions of God. So one of the important definitions that we have is that he who is the cause of all causes. That is what is being explained in the previous paragraph before this. Okay, now we can go on to the next paragraph.
Okay, continue, Rohit.
Yes, Madhu.
Oh. The Supreme Absolute Truth has this inconceivable potency out of which this cosmic manifestation has been produced. In other words, the Supreme Absolute Truth supplies the ingredients, and the living entity and cosmic manifestation are the byproducts. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it is clearly stated, Yato va imani bhutani jayante. The absolute truth is the original reservoir of all ingredients, and this material world and its living entities are produced from those ingredients. Less intelligent persons who cannot understand this doctrine of byproducts cannot grasp how the cosmic manifestation and the living entity are simultaneously one with and different from the absolute truth. Not understanding this, one concludes that the doctrine of byproducts implies that the absolute truth itself is transformed. Unnecessarily fearing this, one then concludes that this cosmic manifestation and the living entity are false. Shankaracharya gives the example of a rope being mistaken for a snake, and sometimes the example of mistaking an oyster shell for gold is cited. But surely such arguments are ways of cheating. As mentioned in the Mandukya Upanishad, the examples of mistaking a rope for a snake and an oyster shell for gold have their proper applications and can be understood as follows. The living entity in his original constitutional position is pure spirit. When a human being identifies himself with the material body, his misidentification is like mistaking a rope for a snake or an oyster shell for gold. The doctrine of illusory transformation of state is accepted when one thing is missing for another. When one thing is is accepted when one thing is mistaken for another. Actually, the body is not the living entity, but according to the doctrine of illusory transformation of state, one accepts the body as the living entity. Every conditioned soul is undoubtedly contaminated by this doctrine of illusory transformation of state. The conditioned state of the living entity is his diseased condition. Originally, the living entity and the original cause of this cosmic manifestation exist outside the state of transformation. But mistaken thoughts and arguments can overcome a person when he forgets the inconceivable energies of the Supreme Lord. Even in the material world, there are many examples of inconceivable energy. The sun has been producing unlimited energy from time immemorial, and so many byproducts result from the sun. Yet, there is no change in the heat and temperature of the sun itself. If the sun, despite being a material product, can maintain its original temperature and yet produce so many byproducts, is it difficult to understand that the Supreme Absolute Truth remains unchanged in spite of producing so many byproducts by his inconceivable energy? Thus, there is no question of transformation as far as the Supreme Absolute Truth is concerned. In Vedic literature, there is transformation of a material object called a touchstone, which simply by touch can
Not transformation, information, Madhvi. It's not a transformation, information.
In Vedic literature, there is information of a material object called a touchstone, which simply by touch can transform iron into gold. The touchstone can produce an unlimited quantity of gold and yet remain unchanged. Only in the state of ignorance can one accept the Mayavad conclusion that this cosmic manifestation and the living entities are false or illusory. No sane man would attempt to impose ignorance and illusion upon the Supreme Absolute Truth, who is absolute in everything. There is no possibility of change, ignorance, or illusion in him. The Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Absolute Truth, is transcendental, completely different from all material conceptions, and full of inconceivable potencies. The Shvetashvatar Upanishad confirms that the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead is full of inconceivable energies and that no one else possesses such energies. It is only by misunderstanding the inconceivable energies of the Supreme that one may conclude that the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal. Such a deluded conclusion is experienced by a living entity when he is in an acute stage of disease. In Srimad Bhagavatam 3.33.3, there is a clear statement that the Supreme Atma, the Lord, has inconceivable and innumerable potencies. It is also stated in Brahma Samhita 5.5 that the Supreme Spirit has many variegated and inconceivable energies. Nor should one think that there is any possibility of ignorance existing in the Absolute Truth. Ignorance and knowledge are conceptions in this world of duality, but in the Absolute, there cannot be any ignorance. It is simply foolishness to consider that the Absolute is covered by ignorance. If the Absolute Truth can be covered by ignorance, then how could it be said to be absolute? Understanding the inconceivable energies of the Absolute is the only solution to the question of duality. This is because duality arises from the inconceivable energies of the Absolute. By his inconceivable energies, the Supreme Absolute Truth can remain unchanged and yet produce this cosmic manifestation with all its living entities, just as a touchstone can produce unlimited quantities of gold and yet remain unchanged. Because the Absolute Truth has such inconceivable energies, the material quality of ignorance cannot pertain to him. The true variegatedness which exists in the Absolute Truth is a product of his inconceivable energies. Indeed, it can be safely concluded that this cosmic manifestation is but a byproduct of his inconceivable energies. Once we accept the inconceivable energies of the Supreme Lord, we will find that there is no duality at all. The expansion of the energies of the Supreme Lord is as true as the Supreme Lord himself. But despite all the variegated manifestations of the Supreme Lord's energies, there is no question of transformation for the Supreme Lord himself. Once again, the example of the touchstone can be cited. In spite of producing unlimited quantities of gold, the touchstone remains the same. We therefore hear some sages say that the Supreme is the ingredient cause of this cosmic manifestation. Also, the example of the rope and the snake is not irregular. When we accept a rope to be a snake, it is to be understood that we have experienced a snake previously. Otherwise, how can the rope be mistaken for a snake? Thus, the conception of a snake is not untrue or unreal in itself. It is the false identification that is untrue or unreal. When by mistake we consider the rope to be a snake, that is our ignorance. But the very idea of a snake is not in itself ignorance. Similarly, when we accept a mirage in the desert to be water, there is no question of water being a false concept. Similarly, when we accept a mirage in the desert to be water, there is no question of water being a false concept. Water is a fact, but it is a mistake to think that there is water in the desert. Thus, this cosmic manifestation is not false, as Shankaracharya maintains, Actually, there is nothing false here. It is because of ignorance that the Mayavadis say this world is false. The conclusion of Vaishnava philosophy is that this cosmic manifestation is a byproduct of the inconceivable energies of the Supreme Lord. The principal word in the Vedas, Pranav or Omkar, is the sound representation of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, Omkar should be considered the supreme sound. But Shankaracharya has falsely preached that the phrase Tat Tvam Asi is the supreme vibration. Omkara is the reservoir of all the energies of the Supreme Lord. Shankara is wrong in maintaining that Tat Tvam Asi is the supreme vibration of the Vedas, for Tat Tvam Asi is only a secondary vibration. Tat Tvam Asi suggests only a partial representation of the Vedas. In the several verses of Bhagavad Gita, 8:13, 9:17, 17:24, the Lord has given importance to Omkara. Similarly, Omkara is given importance in the Atharva Ved and the Mandukya Upanishad. In his Bhagavad Sandarbh, Srila Jiva Goswami has given great importance to Omkara. Omkara is the most confidential sound representation of the Supreme Lord. The sound representation or name of the Supreme Lord is as good as the Supreme Lord himself. By vibrating such sounds as Omkara or Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, one can be delivered from the contamination of this world. Because such vibrations of transcendental sound can deliver a conditioned soul, they are known as Tarak mantras. That the sound vibration of the Supreme Lord is identical with the Supreme Lord is confirmed in the Narad Pancharatra. Yaktam hi Bhagwan eva sakshan Narayanah swayam Ashtakshara swarupena mukheshu parivartate. When the transcendental sound is vibrated by a conditioned soul, the Supreme Lord is present on his tongue. In the Mandukya Upanishad, it is said that when Omkara is chanted, one attains perfect spiritual vision. In other words, in spiritual vision or the spiritual world, there is nothing but Omkara. Unfortunately, Shankara has abandoned this chief word, Omkara, and has whimsically accepted Tat Tvam Asi as the supreme vibration of the Vedas. By accepting such a secondary vibration and leaving aside the principal vibration, he has given up the direct interpretation of the scripture in favor of his own indirect interpretation. Sripad Shankaracharya has unceremoniously obscured the Krishna consciousness described in the Purush Vedanta Sutra by manufacturing an indirect interpretation and abandoning the direct interpretation. Unless we take all these statements of the Vedanta Sutra as self-evident, there is no point in studying the Vedanta Sutra. Interpreting that aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra according to one's own whim. Interpreting the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra according to one's own whim is the greatest disservice to the self-evident Vedas. As far as the Omkara Pranav is concerned, it is considered to be the sound incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As such, Omkara is eternal, unlimited, transcendental, supreme and indestructible. He, Omkara, is the beginning, middle and end, and he is beginningless as always, as well. When one understands Omkara as such, he becomes immortal. One should thus know Omkara as the representation of the Supreme situated in everyone's heart. One who understands Omkara and Vishnu as being one and the same and all-pervading never laments in the material world, nor does he remain a Shudra. Although he, Omkara, has no material form, he is unlimitedly expanded, and has unlimited form. By understanding Omkara, one can become free from the duality of the material world and attain absolute knowledge. Therefore, Omkara is the most auspicious representation of the Supreme Lord. Such is the description given by the Mandukya Upanishad. One should not foolishly interpret an Upanishadic description and say that it is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot appear himself in this material world in his own form that he sends his sound representation Omkara instead. Due to such a false representation, Omkara has come to be considered something material, and consequently Omkara is misunderstood and eulogized as being simply an exhibition or symbol of the Lord. Actually, Omkara is as good as any other incarnation of the Supreme Lord.
Okay, I mean, that needs some explanation. In our concept of Krishna consciousness, in our philosophy, we don't say that the deity is as good as the Supreme Lord. We say the deity is the Supreme Lord. We don't say the deity is as good as the Supreme Lord. It is the Supreme Lord. The deity is the Supreme Lord. Similarly, if you say the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is Golokera Prema Dana Harinama Sankirtana, right? So if it is descending from Goloka, how are we able to chant with our material tongue and hear with our material ears? How is that possible? It is coming from the spiritual world. So when the Mahamantra descends from the spiritual world, in when the Mahamantra becomes accessible to the residents of this material world. So just because it is accessible, just because the Mahamantra is accessible, does not mean it is material. He can vibrate it with the material tongue and heard with the material ear, but the sound vibration is not material. That is what is being explained in regard to Omkara also here. So how do we? It is like previously we studied the example of the mirage, right? So when we see Radha Madhav Ashtasaki in Mayapur, or what is the deity in Gurgaon?
Radha Damodar Prabhuji.
Radha Damodar, okay. So when you see Radha Damodar in Gurgaon temple, he may appear to be made of marble. They may appear to be made of marble, but they are Sachidananda Vigraha. Just like, so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains this. Not Bhaktisiddhanta, in fact, Brahma Samhita says, Premanjana, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gives a wonderful purport to that. But the Brahma Samhita says, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundara Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. So, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena. Anjana means the eye. This eye we are talking about. Physically manifest eye, physical organ, or this faculty of vision, this material faculty of vision, when it is tinged with Premanjana, Anjana means ointment, actually. So when we apply that Anjana, ointment of love, then when you see Radha Damodar, you will see the Sachidananda form of Radha Madhav or Radha Damodar. But as long as your eyes are not anointed with the ointment of love, you see them as marble. So that is the distinction between material vision and spiritual vision. So when we are sufficiently realized, then we can see the same deity as Sachidananda. So in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, uh, Sridhar Swami, while commenting on the first verse of the Bhagavatam, Jiva Goswami, while commenting on the first verse of the Bhagavatam, they say that the Lord's form appears to be material. How? Just like the mirage, you know, it is actually land, but when you, for example, when you're driving, it's summer, very hot day, you're driving on a road, suddenly it'll appear like there's water ahead. You'll feel that reflection. Many of you who have driven may have that experience. So even though it is land, to your eyes it is appearing like water. So like that, even though the Lord's form is spiritual, it is appearing to us as material. Similarly, it is only an appearance to us, or it's also, you could say it is, I mean, you could say it is accessible also. Like for example, the marble form of Radha Damodar or Radha Madhav were accessible. So it is a form when Golo, Harinam Golokera Premadana Harinama Sankita, when it descends to the material world, that form is accessible. But that does not mean it is material because we are accessing with the material sense. No, it's still spiritual only. That accessing what you're seeing, I mean, you're thinking it is marble, or we are thinking it is, that is like water in a desert, which is called the mirage. Actually, it is not, there's no water. It appears like it is water. Actually, it is just desert. Like that. So it appears that it is material, marble, but actually it is Sachidananda. So when one's eyes are anointed with the ointment of love, then it will not appear like marble. You will see Sachidananda form of love. I think we'll stop there for today. Are there any questions or thoughts or reflections? There are, I mean, this is a very dense chapter. Very, very interesting though. We learn a lot of very important truths about Krishna consciousness here. Jyoti, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. Urudhwani, are there any rules to it should not be pronounced wrongly, like that voice should not be taken out in a wrong form, or should be taken out by a particular category of girls or women, like that? Is there any rules for that?
No. Women can, Chaitanya Charitamrita explains that the woman would always recite that Ulu Dhwani when there is anything auspicious in relation to the Lord or devotional service. When they see a great devotee, they ululate. It's called ululation. Then when they see the deities, when they see the arati, so there's no such rule. This is actually spiritual. It is a recommended activity when one sees when one comes in one has the fortune to come in touch with something uh, purely Krishna conscious.
So there is no aparad in taking.
No, there's no.
And similar, how you told in relation to Radha Krishna deities or Radha Damodar deities. So it's like even for Narasimhadev deities, when the love of Godhead, when it develops properly, then that time how they see the Vigraha of Narasimhadev, it appears different, right?
They see a half lion, half man form.
Okay.
We are seeing granite.
Yeah.
But they see half lion, half man form.
Okay. I was just curious, so I asked.
The Sachidananda half lion, half man form.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts, reflection, question? Okay. So there are no further thoughts or reflective questions. We'll stop here and we'll resume again the coming, we'll resume again next Thursday. Next Thursday will be regular time. This Thursday is because of the special request from the Delhi devotees.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpataruscha kripa sindhuvecha
Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo.
The Prabhupada ki Jai Gaura Bhakti.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Guruji.